السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned that there are 10 things which impacts the integrity and the reputation of a person. So he will discuss all of these 10 things in detail. But for now, like we said, he first gives an introduction. So he says, لأن الطعن إما أن يكون لكذب الراوي في الحديث النبوي بأن يروي عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم ما لم يقله متعمدا لذلك، أو تهمته بذلك بأن لا يروى ذلك الحديث إلا من جهته فيكون مخالفا للقواعد المعلومة، وكذا من عرف بالكذب في كلامه وإن لم يظهر منه وقوع ذلك في الحديث النبوي، وهذا دون الأول، أو فحش غلطه أي كثرته أو غفلته عن الإتقان، أو فسقه أي بالفعل والقول مما لم يبلغ الكفر، وبينه وبين الأول عموم، وإنما أفرد الأول لكون القرح به أشد في هذا الفن. وأما الفسق بالمعتقد فسيأتي بيانه، أو وهمه بأي يروي على سبيل التوهم، أو مخالفته للثقات، أو جهالته بأن لا يعرف فيه تعديل ولا تجريح معين، أو بدعته وهي اعتقاد ما أحدث على خلاف المعروف عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا بمعاندة بل بنوع شبهة أو سوء حفظه، وهي عبارة عما يكون غلطه أقل من إصابته. So he mentions the 10 here, as you can see. He gives this brief overview. The first one which he mentions is, he says, لِكَذِبِ الرَّاوِي فِي الْحَدِيث, is where a person lies in hadith. He lies against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when a person lies against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's actually fabricating, and therefore instead of using the word kizb or kadhib, he should have rather used the word iftira. وَلَوْ قَالَ بَدْلَهُ الْإِفْتِرَاءُ وَهُوَ الْكَذِبُ عَنْ عَمَدٍ لَكَانَ أَوْلَى. So this is in contrast to those cases where a person mistakenly fabricates. That when a person makes an error or a mistake, by mistake he attributes to the Prophet ﷺ, then the narration will be discarded, but it will not impact that person's integrity. بخلاف ما روى ساهيا، فالمراد بالكذب في المتن الكذب على سبيل العمد. It's where a person intentionally fabricates against the Prophet ﷺ. If a person does a mistake, it is fine. Few mistakes are overlooked. But intentionally fabricating something against the Prophet ﷺ is a major sin. We know the mutawatir hadith, من كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. And in fact, if a person regards it as permissible, then although the vast majorities of scholars are of the view that the person will still be in the fold of Islam, there were those who actually felt that the person would actually lose his iman. Ibn al-Hanbali rahmallah said, وَفَاعِلُهُ مُرْتَكِبٌ كَبِيرَةً اتِّفَاقًا, that the person who does this here, he's perpetrating a major sin according to all scholars. ثُمَّ إِنِ اسْتَحَلَّهُ, if he has to regard it as permissible, then he becomes a kafir. But وَإِلَّا فَالْمَشْهُورُ مِنْ مَذَاهِبِ الْعُلَمَاءِ أَنَّهُ لَا يَكْفُرُ. The preferred view according to scholars is that he does not become a kafir. And then he quotes Alama Kamal al-Shumuni that وَذَهَبَ الشيخ أبو محمد الجويني إلى أنه يكفر, that Alama Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni, he was of the view that a person becomes a kafir وَيُرَاقُ دَمُهُ, and he should be killed. Although then his son Imam al-Haramain Abu al-Ma'ali al-Juwayni weakened his father's view and he chose the view of the majority. But you can see how severe it is. So there is no doubt that this person here now, because he fabricated against the Prophet ﷺ, we can now no more trust him with any narrations, and he loses all his integrity and his reliability. And then even if he repents, we find that many senior scholars believe that then too we cannot accept his narrations. That one is, he'll be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He repented, that's bainahu wa bain Allah. When he passes away, he'll go to Jannah. But lying is an addiction. So how do we save ourselves from that? So Imam Ahmad and Abu Bakr as-Sayrafi, they all felt that still we cannot trust him in hadith. So although then there were other scholars, and maybe we'll discuss it when we come to the detailed chapter of it, there were other scholars who felt that if he sincerely repents, then we can even begin to accept narrations from him. So that's the first one, where a person intentionally lies against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then the second thing which causes a dent in a person's integrity is أو تهمته بذلك, that a person is accused of lying. There's doubt against him. So we do not have any clear-cut evidence that he definitely did lie or fabricate against the Prophet ﷺ, but there are indications which would lead us to doubt his narration and to assume that his narration is inaccurate. And this is if he is the only person who is dubious in the chain. وَلَا يَكُونَ فِي السَّنَدِ مَنْ يَلِيقُ يُتَهَمْ إِلَّا هُوَ. That he is the only person. Then, and we find that matan, it seems problematic. When we say it seems problematic, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah gives 3 examples. He says, that the first is that the narration is only narrated from this particular person. So he is the only one who transmitted this narration, and he is not competent enough to narrate it alone. So that raises a concern that how is it that from all the galaxy of narrators, he was the only one who managed to get this narration. But then again, that does not mean that all gharib narrations are rejected. We have discussed gharib before, and we did mention that a gharib narration could be accepted. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides scholars of hadith, and they are able to detect which narrations are weak and which would be accepted. إذ جرت عادة أهل الحديث الذين أقامهم الله حرصا لسنة نبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من شياطين الملحدة إذا أتاهم خبر بإنسان بهذه المثابة أن يغلب على ظنهم أنه كذب ويحكم عليه بالوضع من غير قطع به إذ قد يصدق الكذوب. So scholars would be able to detect which kind of gharib narrations are accepted and which kind of gharib narrations raises a question mark. So that is one thing. Then another thing which could raise doubt is that the narration goes against famous laws of Islam. وَيَكُونُ مُخَالِفًا لِلْقَوَاعِدِ الْمَعْلُومَةِ. So Allama Munawi rahmallah, he says, لكن صرح غيره بأن كل حديث أوهم باطلا ولم يقبل التأويل أو خالفه القواعد الكلية القطعية المجمع عليها يكون مكذوبا عليه. And then they also narrate a hadith in this year which Imam Ahmad has narrated. إذا سمعتم الحديث عني تنكره قلوبكم وتنفر منه أشعاركم وأبشاركم وترون أنه بعيد منكم فأنا أبعدكم عنه. So this shows that if you have an established law of Islam and now you only have this one person who we don't even know anything about him, he comes and he narrates something which contradicts that firm law, that known law, then obviously we will doubt what he is saying. But here a person may argue that possibly what he is narrating, it is a abrogator, it is nasikh. So then to respond to that, we say that if it was really a nasikh narration, then there should be a few known narrators who would have also narrated it. We cannot have this unknown person coming and narrating it. Or at least the ruling, the purpose of that narration should be known. So maybe the people didn't know about that narration itself, but the view, the fatwa, people would have known about that view. If it was really, we don't need an unknown person to come and abrogate a firm and established law of Sharia. So when a person narrates independently like this here, he loses all his credibility. But now what happens if that there is another narrator who also narrates just like him? So he is not the only one narrating it, he has support. So based on that, Allama Munawi rahmallah says, قضيته أنه إذا روي من غير جهته أيضا وكان مخالفا للقواعد لا يحصل التهمة بذلك للإثنين. That if you have 2 people who are narrating it, then he's saying now there's no more tuhma because now he has some support. But when you're doing the actual rulings, then it's all, you will evaluate every case independently. If you have more than one person, you will look at the status of the other, you will look at what kind of ruling they are narrating, etc. And all of that will have. You ask, is this here from Fid? It's from Al-Yawaqit wa Durar. So whenever we quote from Allama Munawi rahmallah, it's all from Al-Yawaqit wa Durar. The third thing which is that a person does not fabricate against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he is not truthful in his mundane affairs. That although he does not lie in hadith, but generally he does speak lies in other issues. So in that case, too, we cannot now trust him what hadith. وكذا من عرف بالكذب في كلامه وإن لم يظهر منه وقوع ذلك في الحديث النبوي. That if we find him that he is lying in his worldly affairs, although it's not proven that he lied against the Prophet ﷺ, but it is still very severe. So since we caught him lying in other issues, it does raise question marks. وَإِن لَمْ يَظْهَرْ مِنْهُ وُقُوعُ ذَلِكَ فِي الْحَدِيثِ النَّبَوِي فَإِنَّهُ يَكُونُ مُتَّهَمًا عِنْدَ التَّفَرُّدِ. And this here is especially if there is no one else who is narrating it. Thereafter, Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, وَهَذَا دُونَ الْأَوَّلِ. Now there are two ways to translate this here and then two ways to understand it. And based on that, you will get the marja' of the dhamir of هذا. So either it could be that هذا دون الأول, it means that this is inferior to the first type. That's how you can translate it. If you take in this translation, then it means this entire category of tuhma or tuhmati بذلك بألا يروى ذلك الحديث لا من جهته ويكون مخالفا للقواعد المعلومة وكذا من عرف بالكذب في كلامه وإن لم يظهر منه وقوع ذلك في الحديث النبوي. All of this here is inferior to the first type, which is لكذب الراوي في الحديث النبوي عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم ما لم يقله متعمدا لذلك. So this here is the entire category is inferior to the first category. It's light. So that is if you take in the meaning that this is inferior to the first type. That means it's not so harsh like how the first type is. The first type is the worst, and this here is a bit more lighter. So if this is the case, then Alama Qasim rahmallah said, هذا مستغنى عنه. That he felt that if this is the meaning, then it is obvious that if a person lies against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and here a person doesn't lie against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's just speaking lies in general issues, then it's obvious that it's not so severe. However, the benefit of Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioning it is to reinforce the order in which he presents the 10 types, because like he mentioned, that he is not going to put the 10 types in terms of in the two categories of adala and dhab. ولم يحصل الاعتناء بتمييز أحد القسمين من الآخر لمصلحة اقتضت ذلك. So that is the one meaning which you can take. Alama Baqa'i rahmallah, he took another meaning and he said مراده بالأول ما قبله وهو المخالف للقواعد. So in this case it would mean that هذا دون الأول would mean that from the three subcategories of the second category. So you can see the second category is tuhmatu بذلك. Now we have three subcategories. So from these three subcategories, the lying in your general mundane issues is the worst. So now you can see دون الأول means it's the worst. So the first category is when a person lies against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then we have a second category with three subcategories. So we could refer to them as A, B, and C. So A is بألا يروى ذلك الحديث إلا من جهته, that he independently narrates when he is not competent enough to independently narrate. That's the first. The second category is ويكون مخالفا للقواعد المعلومة. And then the third is وكذا من عرف بالكذب في كلامه وإن لم يظهر منه ذلك وإن لم يظهر وقوع ذلك في الحديث النبوي. So from these categories, he's saying that lying is worse than in that case where a person contradicts established laws. So that is the two ways which you can take for this here. Then he mentions أو فحش غلطه أي كثرته. It's when a person makes lots of mistakes. So that word fuhsh, you can see Ibn Hajar is saying kathratihi, it is an essential clause. It must be a lot of mistakes. His errors are so much that there are more than the times when he is correct. فَأَيَكُونَ خَطَأُهُ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ صَوَابِهِ. That his errors are more than the times when he is correct. The mistakes, the narrations which he has narrated with the mistake are more than the narrations which he has narrated with no mistakes. Or maybe they are equal. Why this here is لا يخلو الإنسان من الغلط والنسيان, because every human being makes mistakes. So even pious narrators, reliable narrators, from time to time they did make mistakes. There is no doubt about that. So therefore, it has to be a lot of mistakes. Then only we will discard his narrations. So Alama Khatib rahmallah, he brought the following chapter, باب ترك الاحتجاج بمن كثر غلطه وكان الوهم غالبا على روايته. That not making ihtijaj, not using as proof the narrations of that person who makes lot of mistakes. So under this chapter here, he narrates the following from Sufyan al-Thawri, that ليس يكاد يفلت من الغلط أحد إذا كان الغالب على الرجل الحفظ فهو حافظ وإن غلط وإن كان الغالب عليه الغلط. He's saying that no one is free from mistakes. So therefore, we will compare the amount of mistakes which a person made. If he is generally precise, if 99% of the time he is correct, then we will give him the benefit of the doubt and we will accept his narrations. But yes, even if it's 95% or even 90%, but yes, once it comes that his mistakes are now increasing, then we will have to discard his narrations. أو غفلته عن الإتقان. So this here is when a person has a lot of ghafla, he has negligence. So it's very similar to the previous type, because what is the outcome of his negligence? The outcome of his negligence is that he will make mistakes. So Allama Khatib rahmallah brought a chapter, Babu Radda Ḥadīth Ahli Ghafla. And under this he brought the statement of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu an, لا يكتب عن الشيخ المغفل. That if a person is very negligent, then we will not accept narrations from him. But again, every person experiences negligence from time to time. So therefore, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said that أي كثرة غفلته, that it will mean that a person is extremely negligent. While لأن ظاهر أن مجرد الغفلة ليس سببا للطعن لقلة ما يعافيه الله منها. So he's saying that there are very few people, from time to time you will feel a bit negligent. Then the next time is أو فسقه. So a fisq is where a person makes a sin. So بالفعل والقول مما لم يبلغ الكفر, whether it is verbally or whether it is physically, as long as it does not reach the status of kufr. If he makes a sin with his tongue or with his actions, so because he's an open sinner, we will now not accept his narrations. You know, in verse number 6 of Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyanu. So if this here is for general information that we need to now go to the extra length and verify it, then you can imagine how much more emphasis there would be on hadith. So, here also we base it on what's apparent for us. The batin, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. But if we apparently see a person, and this here again, it does not contradict husnul dhan. That one is husnul dhan, but never ever confuse the two. And one is looking at who the custodians of Sharia, and who are those who will convey deen. So if one is husnul dhan, we will regard the person as better than us. But in terms of accepting from him, then we cannot accept from him because of his sins. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah then clarified that as long as it does not lead, it's not a sin which leads to a kufr, because in that case, we will not even consider that narration to begin with. So this here, Allama Abu Hatim rahmallah, he mentioned in his Al-Majruhin, وَمِنْهُمُ الْمُعْلِنُ بِالْفِسْقِ, that if a person is openly, he does sins. وَإِنْ كَانَ صَدُوقًا فِي رِوَايَتِهِ, even though he might be honest when he narrates, but if openly he does sins. So maybe he drinks wine, for example, or he deals in gambling, for example. But when he narrates, he is very specific and very sure not to lie. Then we will not accept that narration. Why? لأن الفاسق لا يكون عدلا. Because a liar, a fasiq, a sinner cannot be trustworthy. والعدل لا يكون مجروحا. So he said, ومن خرج عن حد العدالة لا يعتمد على صدقه. وإن صدق في شيء بعينه في حاله من الأحوال إلا أن يظهر عليه ضد الجرح حتى يكون أكثر أحواله طاعة الله عز وجل فحينئذ يحتج بخبره. So now a question will come about it. Here he's mentioning sin, and previously he mentioned about lies. So lying is also a sin. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions that the link between lying and this point of general sins is وَبَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ الْأَوَّلِ عُمُوم. So here in our nuskha is this written umum, but in some of the nuskhas you will find وَخُصُوص mutlaq. that there is umum wa khusus mutlaq. We have explained this here before. So every lie is a sin, but not every sin is a lie. That you can do sin by stealing, you can do so many other sins, but every a sin is not a lie. So this here is the meaning of umum wa khusus mutlaq. Then Ibn Hajar rahmallah clarified the reason why he had to mention them separately. So he says, وَإِنَّمَا أُفْرِدَ الْأَوَّلِ لِكَوْنِ الْقَرْحِ بِهِ أَشَدَّ فِي هَذَا الْفَنِّ. That the reason why lying has been mentioned separately is because it is regarded much more severe. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said, ثُمَّ لَمَّا كَانَ هَذَا الْكَذْبُ الْخَاص أَشَدَّ أَنْوَاعِ الْفِسْقِ وَأَقْبَحَ أسباب الطعن حتى قيل بكفر المفتري عليه صلى الله عليه وسلم أفرده وجعله كأنه جنس آخر وقدمه على الكل. That when a person lies against the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, then that is the worst of the worst. So therefore it had to be mentioned separately. It had to be mentioned at the lowest point. And then these are bad, but they're not as bad as that. وأما الفسق بالمعتقد فسيأتي بيانه. That if a person is a fasiq because of his erroneous beliefs, then it will be mentioned shortly. So you will mention it under bid'ah, which is the 9th category which he mentions. Then the next one is أو وهمه. He says that if a person is excessively doubtful, فَيَرْوِي عَلَى سَبِيلِ التَّوَهُّمِ. So he's always doubtful when he is narrating. He's not sure whether he himself is not sure whether he is narrating correctly or not. So we mentioned earlier that Allama Khatib rahmallah brought that chapter. So under the chapter he also brought the quotation of Abdurrahman bin Mahdi that an-nasu thalatha. You get 3 different categories of people. Hafizun mutqinun. One is a hafiz and he's accurate and he is absolutely sure with what he narrates. فَهَذَا لَا يَخْتَلَفُ فِيهِ. There's no ikhtilaf about him. Obviously you can accept his narrations. وَآخَرْ يَهِمُ. But then you get another person who's always doubtful. وَالْغَالِبُ عَلَى حَدِيثِهِ الصِّحَّةِ. He's saying we will inspect all his different narrations. And if we find his narrations are mostly authentic, and how we will inspect it will be mentioned under the next point. So we will inspect it. فَهَذَا لَا يُتْرَكُ حَدِيثُهُ. If you find that mostly he is narrating, he just says waswasa for nothing. And then it will, like also in wudu, that 99.9% of the people, the wudu did not break, but they will still go and make 110 times a wudu because of waswasa. So like that, maybe this person just has waswasa. وَآخَرْ يَهِمُ وَالْغَالِبُ عَلَى حَدِيثِهِ الْوَهَمُ فَهَذَا يُتْرَكُ حَدِيثُهُ. So what his doubtfulness and his insecurity of narrating correctly, we will also inspect his narrations. And if we find that, yes, he is actually making mistakes, then we will not accept any of his narrations. Then the next step is أو مخالفته, that he is always contradicting. But who is he contradicting? أي للثقات. So he contradicts reliable narrators. So this here is the way I told you that scholars inspect a person's narrations. That the narrations of thiqat is the yardstick, it's the scale to determine whether a person is narrating accurately or if he is making mistakes. So we touched on this here previously when we were talking about shadh and munkar, that when the narrator contradicts stronger narrators, then his narration is weakened. So if he does it once or twice or just a few times, then only the narration is weakened, so that hadith will be weak. But he himself as a person, he will still be regarded as honest. We can still trust him. But yes, if he continuously does it, if all the time he's narrating, every time he's narrating, he's contradicting others, then he loses all credibility and we cannot accept any narrations of his. أو جهالته بألا يعرف فيه تعديل ولا تجريح معين. That the person is unknown. And how is he unknown? So Ibn Hajar rahmallah says that we don't know of anyone who made any ta'adil on him. So any scholar who approved of him, anyone who endorsed him. And then he says, وَلَا تَجْرِيحٌ مُعَيَّن. So in our nuskha we have mu'ayyan. In some nuskahs this word is not there, but it's a very crucial and very important word. That when there is jarah, then it has to be clarified on what basis are you criticizing him. You cannot just criticize the narrator. You have to give proof. So, and you can see for ta'adil, he didn't mention the ta'adil mu'ayyan. You don't have to give proof to approve a person, because the asal, according to Hanafis, especially, and many other scholars, we will discuss it also, that is that a person is innocent until proven guilty. So therefore, if anyone says that he is an honest person, they don't have to bring proof. The fact that he is a Muslim, that's enough and sufficient evidence. But yes, if you are criticizing him, now you have to tell us on what basis are you criticizing him. So Allama Baqa'i rahmallah said, وَقَوْلُهُ مُعَيَّنْ قِيلَ لِتَجْرِيحٍ فَقَطْ. That this here is only for tajrih. Only when criticizing him, you need to clarify for us. And the reason احترز به عما لم يعين فيه الجرح بأن يقول فلان ضعيف أو مجروح. If people just say that he is weak, but they're not telling us why, what's making them feel that he is weak, then in that case we will not accept it, and we will do the laws of then what do we need to do with his riwayah. So Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentioned also إشارة إلى أنه لو جرح فيه جرح مجرد لا يكون في هذه المرتبة. إذ التجريح لا يقبل ما لم يبين وجهه، بخلاف التعديل فإنه يكفي فيه أن يقول عدل أو ثقة مثلا. You can just endorse a narrator. You can merely say that he is trustworthy. You don't have to give proof. But if you are saying that he is not trustworthy, then you have to prove why are you saying he is not trustworthy. So this here is one way to know that the person is not in one way that a person is unknown. But there could also be other ways that he is unknown. Maybe a person comes and narrates the hadith, but narrates from him, but takes his title. He doesn't take his name. So we don't this is shuyukh. Or maybe it could be such that the reason why no ta'dil and tajrih was made on him is because he just narrated a few narrations, or maybe he just has a few students. So we'll discuss all of that when we come to the relevant chapter. Because there are actually times when those who are not known, their narrations are accepted. You know, those of you who done Bukhari and Muslim, that in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, there are so many unknown narrators. So sometimes, like, you know, Imam Bukhari just narrated from them. So sometimes it is actually a principle that when an Imam narrates from a person, then it is sufficient. Al-Khatib rahmallah narrates from Yahya bin Ma'in that إِذَا رَوَى عَنِ الْمُحَدِّثِ رَجُلَانِ ارتفع عنه اسم الجهالة. That generally, if two people narrate from a person, then he's no more regarded as majhul. So if that is for everybody else, then if someone on the caliber of Shu'bah or someone on the caliber of Imam Malik rahimahullah, if they have to narrate, then just the fact that Shu'bah has narrated from him, that is sufficient for us. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentions with regards to this in Ta'jil al-Manfa'a, and the profile of Abdullah bin Abi Habiba, he said, هو من الرجال الذين اكتفى في معرفتهم برواية مالك عنهم. That Imam Malik narrated from him, that is sufficient for us. From there we understand that he is a reliable person. Then the next type is bid'atihi. So you know, bid'ah is when a person اخترع شيء, that when a person innovates anything. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah explains what he intends here. He says وَيَعْتِقَدُ that ما أحدث على خلاف المعروف عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. That a person is now innovating something in Islam and is la bimu'anada. Why? Because if he has to do it out of stubbornness, if he has to come and now bring in his own laws in Islam, then that is clear a kufr. But if he does it because shubha, that maybe he assumes, then in that case, وَإِنْ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا جِدًّا, even if it is very little doubt, and a person brings in something into Islam, then that is regarded as bid'ah. And there are two different types of bid'ah. You have that which is mukaffir, which takes a person out of the fold of Islam, which is mufassiq. So this here refers to the second type. And there are lots of different laws with regards to this. So like that, we will also discuss all those laws when we come to the chapter of bid'ah. For now, we can suffice with the statement of Abdullah ibn Mubarak. He said, يُكْتَبُ الْحَدِيث, that we will generally accept narrations from everyone, إِلَّا أَنْ أَرْبَعَ, except from four. غَلَّاتِ, one is a person who makes a lot of mistakes. وَكَذَّابِ, one is a liar. وَصَاحِبُ بِدْعَةٍ, one is a person who innovates. So in this way, you can see, and one is a person who وَرَجُلٌ لَا يَحْفَظُ, a person who does not memorize, but he tries and attempts to narrate from his memory. And that brings us actually to the next point as well. أَوْ سُوءِ حِفْظِهِ, that it's a person who has a weak memory. Now, if you have the same print which I am using, then the ibara after it goes, وَهِيَ عِبَارَةٌ عَمَّ يَكُونُ غَلَطُهُ أَقَلَّ مِنْ إِصَابَتِهِ. So the meaning of it is, how do we know a person has a weak memory? Is his mistakes are less than the times when he was correct. So this here raises a question, because every person made mistakes, whether it was an extremely reliable narrator with a photographic memory, or even if it was an imam, even Imam Malik rahimahullah, even Imam Abu Hanifa, all imams also made mistakes. Every person definitely made mistakes. So he's saying that وَهِيَ عِبَارَةٌ عَمَّ يَكُونُ غَلَطُهُ أَقَلَّ مِنْ إِصَابَتِهِ. So if that person whose mistakes are less, so a person who's 0.0001% mistakes and he has 99.9999% accuracy, and a person who's 51% accuracy and 49% mistakes, they both fall under the same category. So would we say that now all imams and the most reliable narrators, do they all fall under the same category? So you will find that if you have the print of Sheikh Rahili, you'll see there that he says, yes, the quote of Ibn al-Mubarak is also mentioned by Khatib. It's in Al-Kifaya on page 143. So Kifaya is like the most important kitab because of it being filled with all of these type of statements. So if you have the print of Sheikh Rahili, and if you look at the ta'liq, you will see that firstly, if you look at the way he put the text, he got it usul hifzi, then he has wahiya ibara, and then in brackets he has an la yakun. So you can see here in our nuskha it's may yakun. He's taking it and putting it in a negative an la yakun ghalatuhu, that his errors are not less than the amount of times he was accurate. So now he changes the whole thing totally. Then he comments in a footnote and he says that fil asli amma yakun. Undoubtedly, he says that in the manuscript it was written as amma yakun, but huwa la yastaqim. He's saying that it's not correct. Why? Firstly, Ibn Hajar, like we said, he's going to discuss all of these in detail. So when he discusses this in detail, you will see there he's going to mention man lam yurajjah janibu isabatihi ala janibi khata'ihi. So you can see he's clearly mentioning it there. And then he says, وَقَدْ نَبَّهَ عَلَى هَذَا الْخَطَئِ كَثِيرٌ مِنْ شُرَّاحِ النُّزْهَةِ, that many of those of the commentators of Nuzha has also pointed out this error. So it actually refers, how will we know a person has a weak memory? It's just the very same like what was mentioned previously, is that we find that his mistakes are more than the time, than the amount of times when he was correct. So that is why Su'i Hifzi, you know that what I told you about 51% and 49%, that's also Su'i Hifzi. And there when you come to the previous one, then you will see that it's where the mistakes are now like 90% of the time he's making mistakes. So that goes under Fuhshu Ghalatihi. And so Sheikh Rahili mentions that Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah mentions this. So Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah said, سواء كان مساويا أو أكثر، وأما إذا كان غلطه أقل من الإصابة وقليلا بالنسبة إليها فهو مقبول، ويرد على المصنف أنه لا يظهر الفرق بين الغفلة والوهم. He mentions all of that. Likewise, Alama Munawi rahimahullah mentioned it. Nevertheless, this year Usul Hifz is also divided into two categories. There are those who had really bad memories throughout their lives, so it was a permanent condition for them. And then there were those who they started to lose memory at a certain period in their life, maybe as they became older, or maybe at a certain period. So then the laws will differ. Inshallah, we'll continue from here on Thursday. Until then, Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.